It's day 286 of the Ukrainian resistance. Ukraine Media Center starts its operation today. My name is Vasil Samofalov, and we will be talking today about such an interesting thing as a criminal case against private military company Wagner, or as it's usually called, Wagner Group. We will be speaking with the interesting guests, Jason McKew, chairman of the law firm McCue Jury and Partners, Fedor Venislavsky, People's Deputy of Ukraine, member of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine Committee on National Security and Defense and Intelligence, presidential representatives to the Parliament of Ukraine, Sergei Shklyar, member of the Ukrainian Justice Alliance, a member of the Committee on Court Reforms, and Helena Yanchenko, People's Deputy of Ukraine and civil activist. Well, first let's invite Mr. Fedor. He will tell us in detail why is it important and how this idea emerged. Good morning, dear journalists. As the speaker just said, we gathered here for the very important event. Well, unprecedented event in international legal terms from the vantage point of the criminal war conducted by Russia against Ukraine, and the main speaker who will deliver his main ideas is the philosophy doctor in law, the lawyer from Britain, Jason McKew, the protector of human rights, famous not only in Great Britain but throughout the world, famous for initiation for a number of criminal cases against different terroristic organizations, and not on behalf of the state but on behalf of the citizens who were afflicted by that criminal terroristic activities. He has a number of titles and ranks. He was recognized in 2009 as a Man of the Year by British Legal Association. He was working on human rights protection issues in Africa, Asia, Syria, Libya, and he has a very broad experience, so to say. And what's most pleasant and what we want to thank Mr. Jason, that from the very first days of the war he got engaged in resistance the Russian aggression in legal front, and he visited Ukraine to personally document the facts for further their use in his legal activities, documenting the evidences of the crimes of Russian Federation, the armed forces of Russian Federation, and specifically private military company of Wagner, which is actively used by the state of Russia for committing crimes, mass war crimes against the civil population of Ukraine. What's most important is that this international criminal organization, which we recognize and we call our international partners, to recognize as a terroristic organization, it has enough assets throughout the world. And the criminal case is initiated by Mr. Jason on behalf of the citizens of Ukraine who were directly afflicted by criminal terroristic acts of Russian Federation. They have a very good prospects, and it will help us as the state of Ukraine in future international courts to confirm that terroristic activities of Putin's regime, terroristic activities of Russian Federation. And once again, we want to thank Jason for helping us during this difficult period, and he engages all his expertise and knowledge to stand for justice and to help for our fight for freedom. On our end, we promise support on part of Parliament, information support. We promise to provide all the necessary information systematized by the government agencies of Ukraine on a daily basis. And availing myself of opportunity, I want to emphasize that within 286 days of the war, the government agencies of Ukraine scrupulously document every single fact of shelling of civil population by Russian Federation. We have a database of all the persons afflicted identified. We know why they died, under what circumstances, when they died, and we will provide all that information to be used in future court proceedings against the terrorists associated with the state of Russian Federation. Mr. Jason will tell about his initiative further on. Please, Mr. Jason. First of all, we will have all the speakers have their speeches, and then there will be questions and answers session.
It's a privilege to be here and to have been invited, unlike the Russians, to Ukraine. Let me say, President Zelensky is the most important president in the world today. The Ukrainian people are the most important people in the world today. They are not just fighting for their homelands, they are fighting for freedom, democracy, and rule of law. They are the world's front line against tyranny, defending the rules-based order that has helped to keep peace in Europe since the Second World War. And that is why I'm here today. The international community has rightly provided support, yet it can do more, and it must continue to do more. Global civil society has effectively stepped up to the mark, but it can do more. That is why we have sought to play our small part by designing a civil society lawfare campaign for Ukraine. Strategic reparation litigation all over the world on behalf of Ukrainians against all aspects of Putin's war machine. Let me explain to you why lawfare is critically important. An end to this war and peace is inevitable. A Ukrainian victory is inevitable. But Ukraine getting justice it deserves, it hangs in the balance. I remind the international community, peace without justice is unsustainable. And justice means reparations, full reparations. So we must try every route to deliver this justice. There are two roads to justice and reparations that the Ukrainians must pursue. The international negotiated route. This can provide token reparations, but it is vulnerable to realpolitik of the international community. The other route is this campaign's route, a lawfare litigation. This provides real value reparations and is immune to realpolitik. Mr. Putin is kidding himself if he thinks he can negotiate himself out of lawfare justice. Only Ukrainians and independent courts control this depoliticized route to justice. It means this campaign will not stop until payback day arrives. That's why this campaign helps make justice as inevitable as a military victory for Ukrainians. Whilst brave Ukrainians and foreign legions engage in warfare on the battlefields of Ukraine, now Ukrainian and foreign lawyers will fight the Russian oppressors on another battlefront, in the global courtrooms, by using law as a weapon of war to attack, frustrate, hold accountable those who have committed these awful crimes against Ukraine. As the real heroes in army uniforms successfully drive the invaders out of this great country, so now too will they be joined by an army of suits representing ordinary Ukrainian people who can then play their role and start attacking the invaders in global courtrooms outside of Ukraine. The objectives of our global lawfare campaign are simple. 1, to obtain real value, not token, reparation compensation for Ukrainian victims. 2, to get accountability and payback from those responsible for the crimes. 3, to reveal the truth about Putin's war machine and nail their lies. 4, to expose the Russian invaders for what they are, terrorists, a broken state that hires terrorism as a weapon of war. 5, finally, to frustrate, or in simple words, to be a pain in the arse to Putin's war machine through its forced engagement in mass litigation all over the world. On the 1st of November, the first action in this campaign was commenced in the English courts by ordinary Ukrainian people against Prigozhin and Wagner Group. The case will prove to the world that Wagner are terrorists and that Putin conspired with them to commit acts of terrorism against the Ukrainian people. The world will know that Wagner are a terrorist gun for hire and that Putin is in the business of paying for terrorism. This was only the first case. Wagner are just the first target. With resource, further similar cases can be commenced and can be commenced shortly in different courtrooms around the world. But this first case is important and symbolic. Wagner's terrorism and menace is growing. Its tentacles strangle the world. In Africa, Iran, Syria, Putin has used Wagner as a key weapon of his foreign policy, and now in Ukraine. The Wagner hordes must be stopped now at the gates of Europe. Now is the time to stigmatize Wagner and to put it out of business. The first case will help to do just that. The President and his government are fully committed to this campaign and its objectives. Our message to all Ukrainians and global supporters is simple. The more support and resource this campaign has, the more damage we can inflict on Putin's war machine. We are here with our friends in the Ukrainian government to highlight this call to action to the people of Ukraine and the global community who want to make a stand for justice against tyranny. The greater your support, the more Ukrainians that can get justice, the more we can damage Putin's war machine, and the stronger the message we all send of a united front against tyranny. Our message to Mr. Putin and his cronies is also simple. Wherever the Russian machine goes, this lawfare campaign will follow. Long after the shooting has stopped, we will pursue Mr. Putin for truth, justice, accountability, and reparations for Ukraine. The campaign will never give up, and it will never be silenced. Finally, Prigozhin's response to our first action clearly indicated he was not that happy. He reveled in the charges of criminality we made against him and taunted the victims by suggesting he personally would fund the Ukrainian victim case against himself. As he claimed, no one cared about Ukrainians or justice for Ukraine. What a monster. Quoting the heroes of Snake Island, I told him to go fuck himself and that we would not take his blood money. Let's all prove Prigozhin wrong and show what is clear to the rest of the world outside of Russia, that this world does care about Ukraine and about justice. Together, we are stronger. Together, we can fight as one for justice against this Russian war machine. Together, we can shake and peel this Russian doll until its hidden layers reveal its treasures for us to claim and to give to Ukrainians for justice. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks a lot. Наступним прошу до трибуни Сергія Шкляра, відомого українського адвоката, доктора юридичних наук.
Доброго дня. Цей позов цікавий тим, що в нас тут відповідач в цьому позові не Російська Федерація, яка має імунітет, тому це певним чином такий пілотний позов, будуть подаватися і наступні, і в Британії.
The case will be submitted in both Britain and United States. This is a pilot case against the Wagner Group and Mr. Prigozhin as well. The number of cases to be submitted and filed will be growing, as well as number of those who filed the cases, because it's submitted in the interests of the individuals, of the citizens of Ukraine who are currently relocated to Great Britain. It's about 150,000 persons. They are the potential pleaders in this case, and such cases will also be submitted in the interest of the business against business, and it's interesting also because it's in good hands, in reliable hands, because the companies of Jason McKew have different experience in the similar cases. They have experience in law cases against Prigozhin. They were representing the campaign against Prigozhin. Our colleagues, our British colleagues, say that Jason will win eventually. The process may take from 1 to 3 years. On the bright side, the proceedings will not recognize the issue of jurisdiction, so all the persons fall under relevant jurisdictions. They have a right to plea in courts of England, and this strategy cannot be disclosed fully due to the reasons that we all understand, due to certain actions in proceeding, but the process will be gradually disclosed. We'll proceed to the further questions because they will relate to implementation of these resolutions. Dear colleagues, I think that it's obvious for the whole world that Ukraine is dealing with a cowardly, vile, but formidable enemy which does not neglect any measures and who doesn't really care about international law and the traditions of war. And this war can only be won with inliner strategy and with engagement of a broad support, of the support of the all civilized world. And from this tribune, I want to thank Mr. Jason for his initiative and for the initiative of the lawsuit in a number of countries, and his initiative for creation of Ukrainian Justice Alliance, which will protect the citizens of Ukraine, the state of Ukraine, and Ukrainian companies in global courts. The Ukrainian Justice Alliance includes leading legal companies. Mr. Shklar represents one of them, and best legal schools of Ukraine, and Ukrainian scientists as well. It's not the only instrument you use today on behalf of Ukraine, but in the same way we develop a number of tools which we started implementing recently. For example, Ministry of Justice advocated the implementation of the resolution of the General Assembly of United Nations to condemn the crimes of aggression of Russian Federation, but what's more important, to have Russia physically pay with the costs for the losses inflicted on Ukrainian society, business, and our state. On 14th of November, the resolution itself was adopted during General Assembly of the United Nations, and we will continue working on the international treaty, which different countries can be joined. But that's on the one tool that we're discussing today are the private suits filed by the individuals. In that regard, we appreciate the initiative we're talking about, and the task, the strategy is to bomb Russia and Putin and Wagner Group, all their terroristic organization, with lawsuits, so that they allocate part of their time, of their efforts, they move it from killing Ukrainian population to protection in legal field. It's no secret to anybody. It's obvious that Wagners are not just a terroristic organization. They're a terroristic organization sanctioned, supported, and financed by Putin himself. under other circumstances, they would never have had access to penitentiary system of Russian Federation where Prigozhin feels at home. They would never have get access to unlimited national treasury resources. But now we can only be talking about that and exchange this information as people who think logically, who think reasonably. Jason's campaign task is to prove all these facts in the courts so that the liability is inevitable for Russian terrorists. And I want to thank once again Mr. Jason, all Ukrainian lawyers engaged in this initiative for what they're doing, for their support, for their help, their assistance, and for drawing attention to the problems Ukraine is facing now. Thank you, Ms. Galina, for your call to bomb Russia with lawsuits. And I think that Mr. Fedor Venislavsky will give his final evaluation, and then we'll proceed to answers and questions and answers session. Dear colleagues, just a small summary. You've heard the basic information. We have an opportunity to use the private initiative to recognize the terroristic organization as a criminal terroristic organization which inflicts losses on Ukraine. And we have to understand one legal aspect in this regard. Since Jason initiates these suits in laws of England and then in American courts, in justice, there is a notion that when those facts are proved by one court, it will be undeniable evidence for other courts, and state of Ukraine will obviously use all this information in their further fight. And to finish it, to summarize, I want to give you an information documented on a daily basis by our government agencies, which will help support our legal position by Jason in the course. Within 286 days of war, 38,000 residential houses were destroyed by Russian terrorists, 670 of them totally, 2,719 educational institutions destroyed, more than 1,250 medical institutions were destroyed, including 143 destroyed to the ground. And this information is scrupulously documented, and in the courts where Ukraine will file suits against Russia as an aggressor who committed a number of criminal acts against Ukraine as the state, and in the same way this information may be used by individuals within the framework of Jason's campaign, which will further on impede Russia from denying their crimes in future. I will invite all the speakers. Maybe I will have a first question. It was said that it's a private initiative, and can you please tell us how it works? What is the advice for our internally relocated persons? How can they file their lawsuits already now?
So we have large numbers of law firms and companies ready for Ukrainian victims to contact and to be able to enroll into the cases. What we will be doing is giving out public information with the help of your government and its information delivery services, to be able to properly advise which claimants can be in what case, with what lawyers, in what country.
Thanks a lot. Прошу, чи є питання? Прошу.
Надія Юрченко, Укрінформ.
Nadia Yurchenko, Ukrinform. I think this initiative is quite important, but I think it looks more like political rather than legal. I would like to find out maybe some aspects. You mentioned about 150,000 claimants. Are you going to enter in any agreements with them? And you mentioned a lot of firms which are ready to get engaged in them, but who will pay for that? And what are the further steps? You announced this initiative. Have you already filed any suits, or are you ready to file them only after somebody just comes to you with that?
Okay, first of all, let's just nail that nonsense. This is not political. This is about justice and human rights. I've spent 30 years of my career, as with the other lawyers around the world who have done similar cases as me, and we're all giving our time to do this as a civil society lawfare campaign. We have come to the government because we know we can be more effective with the government's help, and as a matter of courtesy, because there's a war on, that we would be wrong if we did something which didn't have their blessing. So that's the first point. The second point, I think, is about scale. I'm just the face of this, really. There's many, many others. There's law schools in America. There are law firms, some of the largest law firms in the world, all involved in this campaign. I'm just the face speaking for them. So I think the expertise and the capacity is not an issue. You come on to your next valid point, which I think is very pertinent, resource. We can't fight the Russian war machine without resource. Of course we need it. Otherwise, I've got one hand behind my back going into a boxing ring with them. That's no good. But I am confident from what I've heard and what I've seen and my experience of raising support and resource in other cases that this will not be a problem in this case, for the reason that people do care about justice and Ukrainian justice.
Michael Ashura, Newsweek magazine.
Oh, thank you.
Two questions. One for Jason and one not for Jason. Jason, you said that the cases against Wagner Group, the project of using Wagner Group, is only the first step. I'm curious what other targets you have for the future, which are involved similarly with Wagner Group in Russian aggression. И не для Джейсона. Было сказано, что
And the second question is not for Jason. It was said that the American law firms may be involved on Putin's side, that Putin may use American legal system to his advantage. What should Americans understand about these law firms, about those processes, what Americans should do in order not to let Putin use American legal system to his advantage? Thank you.
Okay, to answer the first part of your question, so we have a number of cases ready to go. There's another case in England. There are two different cases in America ready to go. One of the other ones is about targeting Wagner in America. The other ones, I don't want to say what, because we will be doing legal moves to try and seek to freeze some assets before we go public. But what I think I can say is it's against aspects of the Russian war machine. So think like those who have funded, supported, and facilitated aspects of it, financiers. Think about the banking systems that have been involved in that. Also think about those who have been involved in sanction busting in whatever format. They are just some of the targets.
Що стосується вашого запитання про
Regarding your questions on the prospects of using of American legal system by the Russian criminals, I want to remind you that there is a reason that the Ukrainian Parliamentary Committee for Defense, Security and Intelligence approved the resolution to recognize Russia as the terrorist state. It was not made for some political purpose. It was made solely for legal consequences of those actions. And after our parliament, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, accepted the appeal to other countries to recognize the Russian Federation as the terrorism sponsor. Now that we work through diplomatic representations with the State Department of United States, with the administration of the President Biden, to have United States recognize Russia as the terrorism sponsor, this case initiated by Jason can assist in legal mechanism to achieve that target. So that goal is very simple. The United States, they demonstrate intolerance to any terrorism-related states. Anybody related to terrorism will be brought to liability. And if we, together with the partners, United States and the countries of Europe, if we support this initiative in recognition of Russia as the sponsor of terrorism or terroristic regime, so the terrorists, or even if it's a government organization, these terrorists will not have arguments in the civilized world to deny their terroristic substance. Well, my question is about the consequences. What will be the consequences for Wagner and its members? Will it be the arrest of assets or penalties? Who can give the... Or is it a criminal litigation of the top management, or litigation of certain fighters who think they will never be liable in front of the law? What will be the consequences for Wagner and the members of Wagner? Thank you.
Yes, we have to separate different things. Designations around the world are very important because they lead to restrictions, and they lead to penalties, and they lead to stigmatization, all of which drives a terrorist organization to end. That's why those schemes are there. What we're doing is something different but complementary. What we will be doing with Wagner is a web. It's just like any other terrorist group, whether the IRA or whatever. It uses the same principles. There are money men behind them. They have assets behind them. Wagner, as you know, has a number of assets all over Africa. In other places around the world. I don't want to go into details, but we've been monitoring them for a long time. In fact, before your war started, we were monitoring Wagner and its activities in Africa.
Thanks.
My name's Howard. My name's Howard. I've been doing art therapy with refugee children for the last 5 years. In Lebanon with Syrian refugees, and there's been an unfortunate either-or with the Syrian refugee crisis and what's happening with Ukraine. And so with Wagner being in Syria, is there some legal exposure for the Assad regime and for Iran as well, since they have mercenaries here and they're helping out with the drones? And could there be a class action suit? Syrians and Ukrainians together?
There can be, is the simple word, but not together. They'd have to be separate. But those claims can be managed. Indeed, we started off looking at Wagner for African victims. The same principles can be used regarding Syrian victims. I think at the moment our priority and focus is Ukrainian victims. For obvious reasons. But yes, I think ourselves and other law firms involved, if they can get going on it, great. All the better.
Маємо ще одне питання.
Доброго дня, я Ден Пилащук, представник Reuters з Києві. Це питання до представників українського парламенту. Скажіть,
I have a question to Mr. Fedor Venislavsky. I have one question, two parts of it. Can you describe in more detail the level? Maybe you have heard that this is a private initiative, but can you still describe the level of political, logistical, financial support on the part of Ukrainian government? And the second, does it say anything about the growth of trust on part of the Ukrainian government to private companies, to private organizations, rather than international organizations in punishing Russia for their crimes. I appreciate your question. Well, the main task is, first of all, to express the appreciation of Ukrainian government and Ukrainian people to all the friends of Ukraine who in different fronts fight for the justice for Ukraine and the whole world. We don't only work in the military front, but in diplomatic front as well, economic and others. And as the representatives of the parliament, representatives of Ukrainian people, it's our pleasure that the world stars, the showbiz stars, the stars of in the legal field, they stand on Ukrainian side, and for all the civilized world is the evidence of what's white and what's black in this war, who should be supported and who should be helped, and so on. But talking in general about the support and coordination in this initiative, since the very first days of the war, of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine law enforcement agencies, they gather evidences of the crimes, of the war crimes, of the bombardments of the civil facilities, and kidnapping of civil population, and raping of civil population, including women, and we provide access to separate part of this information which may be useful in those lawsuits. That's the first thing. And the second is communication. Communication with Ukrainian society, diplomatic, with the communication with our Western partners. We reiterated it multiple times that the global task, the final task, is to provide reparations to the victims of the Russian aggression and to achieve the real recognition of Russia as the sponsor of terrorism. Today we work in all directions, diplomatically, starting with president and further on with ambassadors and parliamentary members in a number of European countries. Russia is already recognized as the sponsor of terrorism. Our task is to have this status recognized by the United States of America, because in that case it will have very substantial, not symbolic consequences for Russia. It will result in political, economic isolation of Russia. It will result in secondary sanctions. And that will mean that no India, China, or Iran will be able to sell raw materials to Russia, which is necessary to manufacture weapons and ammunition to destroy Ukrainians. Neither they will be able to help them with technologies. But the Western countries, in one way or another, they react to Ukrainians' appeals. Unfortunately, sometimes this reaction is a little bit slow. We asked for heavy weapons, for example, and we received it, but not during the first weeks of war, but after months of war. And it resulted in growth of victims of the war. So we work in diplomatic front, and now we're open in the legal front. I think that if separate or certain Western politicians are afraid to recognize Russia as the sponsor of terrorism, but recognition of Wagner as terroristic organization, provided necessary arguments, it shouldn't be very complicated to them with the necessary legal support. The next step in this litigation will be to prove the direct connection between Wagner, Prigozhin, and Putin, and all the top political management of Russia. We have a lot of information gathered and documented in this regard, and the third step will be quite logical, and it will be undeniable step of recognition of Russia as the sponsor of terrorism, sponsor of Wagner Group, and I think we will make it because we have the most talented, the most motivated lawyers on our side.
Would Prigozhin's conscripted prisoners be given a different legal standard? For instance, the fighter that was recently featured in a video being killed by sledgehammer, Yevhen Prigozhin, specifically said that he really had no choice. It was stay in prison forever or go, and once he got there, it was pretty much throw the fight and die. Do they get treated any different, provided that they don't do some additional act while they're in that position that would constitute a war crime, etc.? Would their status be considered different by being a conscripted prisoner?
I could only answer partly of that because I think the question is more of a sort of political or international law front. In our case, which are civil legal actions around the world, we're not pinpointing between individual Wagner soldiers. And as you know, there's two sorts. There's the cannon fodder that are being used for that, and then there is the more professional outfit. What we are doing is we are targeting aspects and supporters of that which has the money to take off it and give to Ukrainians as reparations. So what we will be doing, though, is in courtrooms around the world proving to the highest standards that Wagner are terrorists and that Putin sponsors terrorism. And that will help then on the international designations, and as with our cases before, that has happened. And also it also leads to international criminal cases to be stopped because we put pressure on the international machine in a positive way.
І останнє питання.
У мене одне уточнення. Хотіла
I have one question to detailize. Is there at least one suit already filed with this private initiative? And if it's not, when are you going to do this? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we've commenced the first suit in London on the 1st of November. There is a protocol process for timings, and our next step in that is when the particulars of the claim will be issued. That's the next step.
Це все. Дякую нашим гостям. Я сподіваюся, вони зроблять все, щоб у військової машини Путіна, як вони сказали.
I want to thank our friends that we will do everything possible to become a pain in the ass for Putin's war machine, and I think that our children will remember Wagner as only a good musical composer, not as the military corporation. Thank you.